Hello. The one on the right is the closest we've got to a fully grown male. The one on the left is an adolescent in his journeyman years. But these are the only two bucks that have answered the pheromone summoning of Princess's daughter at foot. Yes, I've been talking and you're hoping to get fed, aren't you? While we're watching and waiting, has anybody thought about what a stupid idea it is to call for a no-fly zone over Ukraine? At the moment, Russia is trying to make an invasion in Ukraine stick, and they're having a hard time of it. Russia has probably the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, nuclear, nucleator. To establish a no-fly zone, that would mean NATO going in with fighters to attempt to bluff or perhaps shoot down any Russian aircraft moving over Ukraine. That means NATO would have fired upon Russian forces, which technically in Putin's mind would entitle Russia to defend by mounting a vigorous offensive. And I draw your attention to the fact that 5 years ago, Russia began cleaning out, repainting, restocking, and bringing all of its civilian bomb shelters up to a state of readiness where they can be occupied at fairly short notice. When they saw Russia doing that, a place called Finland and a place called Switzerland both decided that they would clean out their own bomb shelters and fallout shelters and stock them up ready for use. And I note that Finland and Switzerland are not part of NATO. Finland and Switzerland are independent countries and they've cleaned out their bomb shelters. NATO never really had much in the way of large civilian pre-stocked, pre-prepared bomb shelters. Even at the height of the Cold War, what NATO used to do was stockpile Valium and barbiturates with a plan for distribution and handing them out free with instructions that people should sedate themselves and take shelter in place at home. That way, it would keep everybody off the roads and you wouldn't get a repeat of the May 1940 refugees tying up the roads and preventing the French from defending themselves against the German invasion. It would also prevent refugees being out in the open and being hurt on the roads and blocking potential emergency relief convoys. So, even back in the days of mutually assured destruction, NATO's plan was to tell its civilians to zombie themselves out on a lot of Valium and sit at home and wait for everything to be over. So, if we consider that Putin knows that NATO is unprepared to shelter its civilians, and if we know that Putin has the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and if we know that Putin has warned everybody that if he gets backed into a corner, nukes are not off the table, not in his battle doctrines. So why does anybody think that if NATO shoots at a Russian aircraft over Ukraine, why would anybody think that that would not be considered in the Kremlin as a perfectly valid reason and excuse for Russia to mount a devastating, massive first strike by surprise on all NATO countries? Is it not reasonable to think that Putin may calculate that his sheltered Russian population stands a very much better chance? Yes, it's your bit of bread, isn't it? Putin may think his Russian population stands a very much better chance of emerging stronger and more obedient from the shelter afterwards than whatever's left of NATO in their unsheltered population after a devastating first strike. A first strike by surprise! Sort of like the way this fella suddenly surprised that fella. Everybody in NATO seems to think that they can be a little bit more aggressive every day and a little bit more aggressive every day, and finally, eventually, Putin will back down. I think Putin's now absolutely perfectly aware that if he stays grinding away at a war of attrition, attempting to occupy his neighbouring country, making the locals ever more unfriendly, I think he knows that in time his population will get sick of the homecoming of endless body bags, and I think, yeah, he would love NATO to take a crack at Russian aircraft while they're bombing and strafing Ukrainians. At the moment, NATO's best trick is to give away free ammunition, free anti-tank missiles, free anti-helicopter missiles, free anti-jet fighter aircraft missiles, and just deliver them by the tens of thousands to Ukraine and hope that Ukrainians can continue to resist the invasion until somebody implements the Julius Caesar solution to get rid of an unpopular dictator. So that's the current prediction. If NATO keeps its head and stays out of it, Putin will fall eventually. If NATO decides to get itself involved, yeah, it might be like going chasing a tiger snake when you've got a broomstick and the tiger snake's cornered and you're between the snake and its nest. And try that. You're often doing very well to stay alive. Anyway, for what it's worth, those are my thoughts. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Sorry about the Zoom button malfunction earlier on, but such is life and it's an otherwise tolerable movie. Ciao.